the president's pick.
Mr. President, I am honored and I am humbled. Thank you very much.
A look at Judge Neil Gorsuch, plus reaction from Capitol Hill on the man who could shape America's legal landscape for decades. Cabinet chaos. Republicans change rules, pushing through more nominees. Honoring the dead, a Catholic mass for the victims of the mosque shooting in Quebec, Canada. And immigration impact. Catholic organizations speak out. We debate both sides of the president's executive action. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, February 1st, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump's pick for the Supreme Court isn't wasting any time. He already hit Capitol Hill seeking support for his nomination. Judge Neil Gorsuch shakes hands with Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who praised him for his long record of faithfully applying the law and the Constitution. We have team coverage. Jason Calvi is tracking developments for us on Capitol Hill tonight. But first, Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the White House with more on the man who could influence the High Court for generations.
Lauren, President Donald Trump's past life as a reality television star was on display last night. He began his primetime address asking the audience, was that a surprise? And today the president met with pro-life leaders from several groups, including the National Right to Life and the Susan B. Anthony list, to talk about the Supreme Court nominee.
Today I am keeping another promise to the American people by nominating Judge Neil Gorsuch.
With those words, President Trump ended weeks of suspense.
I pledge that if I am confirmed, I will do all my powers permit to be a faithful servant of the Constitution and laws of this great country.
If confirmed, the 49-year-old judge from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals would be the youngest justice on the bench, and Gorsuch would impact the High Court for decades. He summed up his minimalist judicial philosophy and focus on impartial judgment last night.
A judge who likes every outcome he reaches is very likely a bad judge.
Gorsuch has a reputation as a solid conservative, earning him comparison to the justice he would replace, Antonin Scalia. He has drawn attention for siding with religious employers against Obama's HHS mandate requiring them to cover contraception, and he has written a book arguing against assisted suicide. But Gorsuch faces a tough confirmation battle, with Democrats already vowing to oppose Trump's nominee before he made the announcement. Senator John Thune of South Dakota, chair of the Republican conference, hopes that won't happen.
I think it's going to be very difficult. This is a well-qualified judge in the mainstream and somebody who I think represents the qualities and the attributes that most Americans want to see in a Supreme Court justice.
I couldn't be more pleased.
Conservatives, like former Senator Jim DeMint of the Heritage Foundation, call Gorsuch a perfect judge for our time.
As a justice of the Supreme Court, the priority is to uphold the Constitution, interpret it in its original context, and that keeps you founded in those original ideas. And Judge Gorsuch has proven that that's his perspective.
On a court with 5 Catholics and 3 Jews, Gorsuch would be the lone Episcopalian, but he does have a Catholic connection, having graduated from Georgetown Prep High School in the Washington, D.C. area, where he was student body president his senior year. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee at the White House, thank you so much. President Trump is urging GOP leadership to do whatever it takes to get Judge Gorsuch confirmed, thus escalating the battle over the vacancy on the High Court. Correspondent Jason Calvi continues this team coverage. He's on Capitol Hill, where Gorsuch must secure support from Democrats. Jason.
Lauren, currently Supreme Court nominees need 60 votes from the Senate to break a filibuster and proceed to a vote. But if the so-called nuclear option is invoked, the filibuster could be broken by simple majority. President Trump endorsed that scenario this morning.
If you can, Mitch, go nuclear, because that would be an absolute shame if a man of this quality was caught up in the web.
President Trump offering his advice for the Senate Majority Leader. Senator Mitch McConnell hasn't said if he'd use the nuclear option, but he's been clear one way or another, Gorsuch will be confirmed, just like when he became an appellate judge back in 2006.
Not a single Democrat opposed Judge Gorsuch's confirmation.
Meanwhile, Judge Gorsuch made the rounds on Capitol Hill today, joined by Vice President Mike Pence.
Last night was the most important day in the Donald Trump presidency to date.
Republicans are thrilled.
Judge Gorsuch has a record of defending religious liberty in the Hobby Lobby case. He wrote powerfully about the importance of religious liberty.
But Democrats are still fuming over Merrick Garland being sidelined last year. He was President Obama's pick to replace Justice Antonin Scalia. Some critics cite the nominee's opposition to assisted suicide.
I'm especially troubled, and I look forward to meeting with the nominee with respect to his views of opposition to Oregon's death with dignity law.
Others say they won't back a filibuster. They may not want to alienate Trump supporters. 23 Democrats are up for re-election in 2018, including 10 in states won by the president. Democrat Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut tells me it's important to keep the 60-vote requirement, forcing consensus on this lifetime appointment to the court. And Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says it would be a sad day if the rules were changed. Lauren?
Jason, what's the next step for the judge?
Well, Gorsuch will continue meeting with senators of both parties, and the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, tells me they'll have a hearing in about 6 weeks. Republicans would like to have Gorsuch confirmed by early April.
All right, Jason Calvi reporting on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. The Knights of Columbus applauds President Trump's nomination to the Supreme Court. Supreme Knight Carl Anderson said in a statement, "It is clear that he will interpret the Constitution as it was written, including our First Amendment right to religious freedom and the right to the life of every person." House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi criticizes Donald Trump's Supreme Court pick, calling it a very hostile appointment. She covered a range of topics in a CNN town hall last night and reaffirmed her support for abortion rights.
They say, oh, Nancy Pelosi thinks she knows more about having babies than the Pope. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I respect what was wonderful for our family, but each family has to make its own decision. And if you are concerned about...
Pelosi went on to praise birth control as an alternative to abortion. Both are contrary to church teaching. A Senate panel with no Democrats present approved 2 of President Trump's cabinet nominees. For 2 days in a row, Senate Democrats boycotted the hearings of Steve Mnuchin and Representative Tom Price. The president's picks for Treasury and Health and Human Services. At least one senator from the opposing party must be present for a vote, but committee chairman Orrin Hatch suspended the rules. Democrats also boycotted EPA nominee Scott Pruitt's hearing.
I have been informed that no Democrats will be in attendance this morning.
Committee rules require that at least 2 members of the minority party be present for a vote to be held. Chairman John Barrasso of Oklahoma accused the absent Democrats of obstructive political theater. The Senate committee approves the nomination of Senator Jeff Sessions to be the next Attorney General after angry exchanges between Republicans and Democrats. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who was not present at the time, was attacked after he criticized Senator Al Franken for his line of questioning.
I object to the senator. We're here to talk about the president's nominee, not a colleague, and I object to disparaging.
Don't take this from my time.
Disparaging a colleague on this committee, and particularly in the colleague's absence. It's just not. It's untoward and it's inappropriate.
The full Senate is expected to vote on that nomination as early as next week, and it has confirmed Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. The former ExxonMobil CEO overcame resistance from both parties. Senators voted largely along party lines. The White House is accusing Democrats of obstructing President Trump's nominees. To prove their point, they say George W. Bush, president, had 16 positions confirmed by February 1st, while President Obama had 13. President Trump, so far, has 6. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer took questions from new journalist voices today from cyberspace.
As I begin to take your questions, I'm pleased to offer the first ever Skype seat question in the White House briefing room to Kim Kalunian from WPRI in Rhode Island.
The reporter asked Spicer about sanctuary cities and the impact they will see under the president's immigration action. We have more on that story coming up. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The White House puts Iran on notice after the country's defense minister admits they carried out a missile test. According to Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor, the launch defies a UN Security Council resolution and underscores Iran's destabilizing behavior in the Middle East. Iran claims the missile test does not violate the 2015 nuclear accord. A warning from former CIA Director David Petraeus about Russia. The retired general tells the House Armed Services Committee that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is looking to benefit from tensions in the U.S. and around the world.
The real center of gravity is the political will of the major democratic powers to defend Euro-Atlantic institutions like NATO and the EU. That is why Russia is tenaciously working to sow doubt about the legitimacy of these institutions.
General Petraeus also says the U.S. isn't doing enough to stop ISIS from using the internet to recruit new members. Catholics in Canada hold a mass for the victims of Sunday's deadly Quebec City mosque shooting. They gathered at a parish just down the street from the scene of the attack. Alexander Bissonnette is charged with murdering 6 people and injuring 19 others. He was known as an extreme nationalist, but his motive is not clear. Catholic bishops in the Philippines object to proposals to reinstate the death penalty in the country. The National Bishops' Conference says bringing back capital punishment goes against the gospel of life. You can read more on this story right now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Pope Francis says Christian hope is not about getting something good that we desire, like good weather.
La speranza cristiana è l'attesa di qualcosa che già è stato compiuto.
The Holy Father says hope is expecting something that already has been fulfilled. Francis took time to greet the crowd today, as he usually does, and look at this, even cuddling a baby in his arm and giving the infant a kiss. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, what does the Holy Father mean when he says hope is learning to live in expectation?
Lauren, I think what he means, and we know by his words, is that we have to hope in what is to come. But Pope Francis underlined the fact that what is to come is it already exists. Christ's victory has already been won. And he brought up the example of an expectant mother. And he said, when a woman finds out she's expecting a child, she lives with that joyful expectation every day, knowing that she will see her child's face. So should we, he said, live with the joyful expectation that we will one day see the face of God.
Did the Pope give any practical advice about putting the virtue of hope into practice?
I thought what was interesting is that he highlighted the fact that people with humble hearts, poor hearts, are already living in this expecting hope. Their hearts are open to this, but it's people who are distracted by their wealth or possessions, or people bogged down by worldly things. It is difficult for these people to live in that hopeful expectation. And so he had the crowd repeat with him 3 times, "We will live with the Lord forever," taking a line out of today's reading of St. Paul to the Thessalonians, that we are to live in that hope and that expectation of what is to come. And it was great that he got the crowd involved. The whole Paul VI Hall was ringing, everyone shouting, "We will be with the Lord forever."
I wish I could have been there. Mary Shovlin, thank you so much. EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, next election, just days after President Trump takes office, his coffers are full. And supreme decision.
So was that a surprise? Was it?
We get expert analysis on President Trump's nominee. President Trump is already putting money in the bank for his re-election campaign. $7.6 million is ready to use on the 2020 election. President Trump has not announced if he will seek re-election, but he did tell White House staffers they were beginning an 8-year run in the White House. Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch praised the late Justice Antonin Scalia last night, calling him a lion of the law. Joining us now is Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel and Policy Director with the Judicial Crisis Network, and Amy Howe, a reporter and founder of SCOTUS blog. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thank you.
What a night last night with the entry of Chief of Justice of Judge Gorsuch and the big announcement. He brought up Justice Scalia in his remarks. How are they similar in their jurisprudence?
Well, Judge Gorsuch has been very eloquent in explaining the same type of principles that Justice Scalia applied, which are faithfulness to the text, faithfulness to the text and history and original understanding of the Constitution, and most crucially, not putting politics first, but trying to make sure you are following the law first, and that shouldn't be affected or have a thumb on the scales for one's political preferences. I hope that's how he will rule on the bench. I think he has every indication that he will. That's exactly what we need in a new Supreme Court justice.
Amy, when it comes to conservative issues, social issues, why do conservatives think he is a good pick?
He, in no small part, because he's a textualist and an originalist, as Carrie just said. You know, he looks at the law, as he said last night. You know, if you like all of the outcomes in your cases, you're probably not doing a very good job.
Right.
Exactly. Right. And I think they're taking a lot of comfort from some of his rulings on religious liberties. He ruled in favor of Hobby Lobby, the retail chain, in its challenge to the Affordable Care Act's birth control mandate. And then when the Little Sisters of the Poor had a case in his court, he was one of the judges who dissented from the decision not to rehear the case. He would have reheard the case, and based on his rulings in the Hobby Lobby case, probably would have ruled for the Little Sisters of the Poor as well.
And had there been, at that time, not a 4-4, but a 5-4, we could have seen a different outcome.
That's right.
Okay. Let's listen to this soundbite from last night. I think it goes to your point about originalism.
I respect, too, the fact that in our legal order, it is for Congress and not the courts to write new laws. It is the role of judges to apply, not alter, the work of the people's representatives.
How does this relate to abortion?
Well, this is something that Judge Gorsuch hasn't had an opportunity on the 10th Circuit to rule on. But I think the key principles here, again, are not even whether he's personally pro-life or pro-choice.
And he is pro-life.
But, okay, I assume that to be the case. But really, how is he going to rule on the court? And if with his approach, a textualist approach to the Constitution, it's hard to imagine he's going to intuit this right to privacy that even many liberal legal scholars acknowledge is not there in the Constitution, that you may be pro-choice, but this is not what the Constitution says. I suspect that's how he would rule on the case. We also know he did essentially the PhD level studies at Oxford, and he was looking at euthanasia, and so he's considered some of these important end of life issues as well.
And he's written a book on that. We had someone on yesterday talking about that. Amy, your thoughts on end of life issues and abortion issues and what he will do on the court?
So here, I think this is, President Trump had promised to appoint someone who was going to be pro-life, and there's every indication that he will be. Part of his opposition to euthanasia and assisted suicide is the idea that life is sacred. As far as the court goes, he is taking the place of Justice Scalia, who was also opposed to abortion, and so the real key vote on the court will probably come from the next retirement rather than from Judge Gorsuch's.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. I could sit here all day and talk to you about this and what it means for the future of our country. Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel and Policy Director with the Judicial Crisis Network, and Amy Howe, reporter and founder of SCOTUS blog. Up next, growing concern over President Trump's executive order. Immigration advocates speak out.
This is very serious. This is affecting lots of people's lives.
We debate the pros and cons. President Trump says so-called sanctuary cities are breaking the law. He issued an executive order last week taking aim at cities across the country that have declared themselves places of safety for illegal immigrants. The cities would lose most federal funding until they comply with immigration laws. Many cities in California already have sanctuary policies that prohibit police from cooperating with immigration agents. State lawmakers have introduced legislation that would extend these measures statewide. Some national Catholic organizations say President Trump's executive order is destructive to families.
These refugees, for example, who are languishing in camps, who are living on half rations, whose children can't go to school, these are the least among us. And our tradition, our Catholic tradition tells us these are the people we have to prefer to take care of.
Representatives from Catholic Relief Services and the Catholic Legal Immigration Network were among today's speakers at the press conference here in Washington, D.C. And joining us now is Kevin Appleby with the Center for Migration Studies. He was at the news conference. Hans Van Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Kevin, you joined 5 Catholic organizations today speaking out about this executive order. Why is it harmful to families?
Well, because refugee families are most vulnerable in these situations overseas where they're in conflict situations, they're in refugee camps, they don't have enough to eat, etc. So they're in peril still. They'll be in peril for 4 more months. They won't be able to come to the United States. If the viewers remember Island Kurdi, the little boy that was washed up on the shores in Greece, that was a family trying to get to Europe because they had to escape ISIS and other persecutors in the region. So this could be another outcome of this decision, that families are going to try to come on perilous journeys and you could lose
like
children.
Elian Gonzalez from Cuba, I think, is something that many people would resonate with. However, you used to work for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. There is Catholic social teaching that says that yes, we can protect our borders. So, to your point, why is this executive order a good thing?
Well, it's a good thing because look at the details of it. The vast majority of countries are still able to send us immigrants, refugees, and others are able to come in. But the countries that have been targeted are 7 countries that are the largest sources of terrorists in the world. And what the president has said is we're going to have a temporary suspension, 90 days, for example, for those countries until we can be assured that we actually have vetting procedures in place that will make sure that we are not allowing terrorists in. Let's not forget, Jim Comey, head of the FBI, testified before a committee saying they had no ability, for example, to vet or check the individuals coming in from Syria.
However, President Obama, before he left office, did say that these vetting procedures, other people have said it, are substantive and take months, if not years, in some cases. Kevin, you seem here to be representing the very emotional part of this, these families who are separated from each other. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that the pause is bad. Mm-hmm. Why, if we are safeguarding our borders, is that pause bad?
Well, there's this distinction here. What Hans was talking about was the visa holders who are coming over. What I'm talking about is the refugee program, which is about
which was cut in half.
Which is cut to 50,000.
50,000 from 100 plus.
The most vetted of entrants into this country. They have to wait 2 years to get security clearances to come in. They're more vulnerable than people come in on visas. That's why it's going to hurt them. And also, during this time, they're going to have to go back. Their clearances will expire, so they're going to have to go back to the back of the line and wait several more years.
Is there a way to accommodate this, Hans?
Look, I think the United States, in fact, has bent over backwards to try to help refugees from all over the world come in. We take in very large numbers of them. On the other hand, we've had recent reports, for example, out of European agencies saying that terrorist groups in the Middle East have used the refugee process, for example, in Europe, to smuggle in terrorists posing as refugees, and the estimates were that thousands of them have made it into Europe. And we have got to be sure that that is not happening in the United States.
Why?
Our program is much different because we interview people over there, we screen them while they're over there in Europe. They just come across the border. And so the refugee program, first of all, we've resettled 800,000 refugees since 9/11, and not one refugee has participated in an attack on U.S. soil from that program. So the program's safe. what is happening here is they're just trying to reduce the numbers, really. It's an excuse to reduce the number of refugees coming in.
I could talk to you again, like our other panel. I could talk to you all day long about this. I think that there are merits on both sides, as everybody in our audience and here. I wish there was some common ground that I could have brought the two of you to. Thank you so much for joining us. Kevin Appleby with the Center for Migration Studies, Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation. Lawmakers introduced a resolution to celebrate Catholic Schools Week, calling them a critical part of our nation's commitment to education, with graduation rates at around 99%. National Catholic Register blogger Kathy Schiffer praises religious sisters who shaped her education. You can read her story at ncregister.com. That does it for us, for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget you can see every broadcast of the show on EWTN's YouTube channel. I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night and God bless.